All right, remember people out there on the internet, the Putnam County Spelling Bee is coming up next week. Make sure you get your tickets. I bought 4. You mind here going to that?
Nope.
Super. You should. They're all musicals. What do you think?
Well, no, I didn't know it was like a theatrical thing. I thought it was a spelling bee.
You thought they were actually having a spelling bee.
It's not even.
You thought the theater department was having a spelling bee.
Maybe because of COVID, they can't hold it in Putnam County. So we're gonna. We don't have a Putnam
What?
County. That's what I know. Putnam County. I don't know half the counties in Alabama.
Oh.
Well, that seems like your first mistake. I'm going to tell your dad and see how disappointed he is in you. Okay, so cognition. It sounds like some of y'all need to work on this. Tell him you pulled a Clay. You might have to put on that thinking cap back there. I think Clay actually made that for me.
I did. Wait, what did he make? The hat up there.
He should have worn it more, I think. Anyway, so yesterday we talked a little bit about different behaviors and learning. Today, cognition. Cognition means to think. Now, last semester I gave you the option of doing some extra credit, and one of the topics was metacognition. Does anybody remember what that is? Did anybody watch that guy, the Sanford professor?
Oh, is this just like learning in a way that it's like passive learning or something like that? No?
Nobody watched that? Can't even get y'all to do extra credit for free. Ashley, you okay? Okay. Know what was going on back there. So, metacognition means to think about what you're thinking about. Now, what the heck does that mean? Well, sometimes you can sit and you can read over these notes. And this unit's a really good unit for this because there's a lot of content, a lot of terms. They're not super complicated, and it's very easy to kind of look through these and not really process them at a very deep level. When you're thinking about what you're thinking about, that means like, okay, let's talk about classical conditioning or operant conditioning or imprinting. Why does this happen? Where does this happen? When does this happen? How does this happen? What other topics does it relate to, and in what way? So these are things that you need to consider. And when you ask yourself these questions when you're going through these topics, when, why, where, how, what does it relate to? That's how you start to make connections in your brain to other things. And the more connections you make, the more that stuff sticks in your brain and the better you remember it, okay? So these are things that you need to consider and ask yourself. Now, cognitive ethology, the branch studying social behaviors. Now, we're only going to kind of skim the surface of social behaviors. Chicken started laying eggs. We have already discussed a little bit the second topic here, cognitive movement. So that means moving in response to some type of stimuli. Now, back last semester, we did a lab where we had some crickets, and we had a choice chamber, and we put them in there, and we were looking to see whether one of two things would occur, kinesis or taxis. Remember, taxis means toward or away from a stimulus. It's got a T in it, so easy to do. And then kinesis, think of crazy. So you've got a stimulus, and there's just random movement due to that stimulus, okay? Taxis is probably one we're a little more familiar with just because we typically see when there's some type of stimuli, something either goes toward or it goes away from that stimuli. It's got to be pretty wild for it just to have some kind of random crazy behavior. I don't know, I feel like, when you turn on the lights after the pre-K class has been napping, then there's pretty much kind of random crazy behavior all over the room. So that's a good kinesis movement, okay? Next thing, landmarking. All right, so let's talk about movement a little bit. I think I mentioned yesterday, you guys and your ability to think and kind of process stuff as you start to drive and figure out where you're going and how you're getting there. And that's one of the most difficult things, especially for some of you who have never paid attention out the window of a car in your lives and you turn 15 or 16 and you don't know where you're going. Now, fortunate enough for you guys, you all have the Google and you can see on Google Maps where you're going. But sometimes it's not reliable. Sometimes maybe you don't have a good cell signal. Sometimes maybe, some gangster steals your phone and you're trying to find your way home on your own. Click your ruby slippers together. Maybe, I don't know. Anyway, so landmarking. This involves using things that you see in order to get you where you need to go. Now, I'm sure you probably do this. Y'all been driving, some of y'all been driving long enough now where you do this without even thinking. You see landmarks coming up, you slow down, you get over, and they become very habitual in nature. But that's something we have to learn how to do. I was watching that Alone series. Have y'all seen this? Alone is the survival show where they get there. It's like the longer you're out there, like the one that stays the longest gets $500,000. And in the last season, if you made it to 100 days, you got $1 million. So one guy actually made it to $1 million. But anyway, where was I going? Oh, one day he was out on this lake fishing, and it came a blizzard, and like whiteout conditions. You couldn't see anything around. And he was getting worried that he wasn't going to be able to make it back to his little cabin so he wouldn't freeze to death. Now, fortunately for him, he recognized that the snow was deep when he walked out there, and so even though it was snowing a bunch, he still could see his footprints and follow him back to his cabin. So he used those as his landmarker guides since he couldn't see his normal trees and rocks and stuff that he looked at, okay? All right, cognitive mapping. This is movement involving thinking, like treasure map games. How we map stuff out in our brain for where things are located. The next thing, this is probably more important here, and if you'll turn to 1135, let's talk about migration. So, why do organisms migrate? Food, what else?
Mating.
Mating, what else?
To escape that habitat.
Escape that habitat. It could be climate. It could be like cold, and so they go south for the winter. It could be warm, and they go north for the summer. We have some humans do that, right? Some people live up north, and they come, see some older folks that do this. They'll come south and stay in Florida all winter, and then they'll go back up north during the summertime because it's too hot. So, migration, this is movement that takes place based on different environmental cues. All right, so types of migration that exist. Let's go through these. First one, piloting. Read that for us, Mason.
These are short trips to a specific point, such as a specific landmark.
All right, so migration doesn't have to be a long ways. Now, what are some migrations that you guys are aware of?
Geese.
I showed you the picture of the wildebeest moving around the savannah. Lots of different types of birds, like geese going south for the winter, going back up north in the summertime. What else? Butterflies going from Michigan to Mexico.
Don't trouts migrate.
Salmon do. Salmon, from what I understand, I think they're laid and then they go out to sea for 7 years roughly, and then they come back to the same place where they were born and lay their eggs. You could also say that for sea turtles. They come and lay on the same beaches where they were born, so they're out at sea. I mean, a sea turtle's brain's like that big. I mean, can you imagine how big a salmon's brain is? That joker's like the size of a pea. And it wanders around out in the ocean for 7 years and comes back to the same place where it was born. Like, how does it do that? I guarantee none of you people, even all you on the internet, if I set you out on a boat at the mouth of the river and let you roam around for 7 years without any navigation equipment, you cannot find your way back. There's no way. Like, they don't have a GPS. What's going on inside their brain? What does that look like in the DNA that you can remember how to get back? Or that you can interact with the magnetic fields of the earth? Does anybody ever think about this? What does that look like inside your brain? And where do those pictures go? I don't know. So many questions. Now, I will say this. Hold on one second before I forget. I did want to say this about learning and thinking. I've got a video I'll show you at the end of class or tomorrow. It's on chimps. And we think that we have a good memory and ability to remember stuff and where it is. Chimpanzees' short-term memory is far superior to ours. Like, in a way that will blow your mind, they can remember stuff when they see it and remember it way better than humans. So in the video I'm going to show you, it's crazy. But anyway, and I wonder if, like other animals, if we could test them, I wonder if aspects of their memory is superior to ours. Like, we dedicate a lot of our brain to thinking and figuring stuff out and making new things, to speech and to listening. But in terms of, maybe other animals' brains are just superior in ways that we aren't able to comprehend because we can't communicate with them. Who knows? I really hope one day somebody comes up with some AI that can communicate with dolphins. I want to know what they're saying. What are they saying? Okay. Migration, piloting, orientation. Tell us about that one, Tay.
These are long trips using hunter-gathering cognition. Ignited stars for sun and full-time sailors, birds, and salmon.
What about those butterflies? You got these monarch butterflies. These jokers are going from Michigan to Mexico. A butterfly, can you imagine how big its brain is? I mean, that thing can't be like the size of a mustard seed. And it's making its way. I mean, you people, if I gave you a Rand McNally road map and you didn't have a GPS on your phone or somewhere in your car, I don't know that you could make it from Michigan to Mexico, to be honest with you. But butterflies can. Is that not something spectacular? It's amazing. Okay. Navigation, using long trips, using landmarks and orientation. I feel like some birds probably use this because they're looking for certain landmarks, maybe where they eat, or other animals like wildebeest. Elephants go on migrations looking for water and food sources. One of the largest migrations in the world by big animals is what? Happens in North America. Caribou, good. Now, buffalo probably was before the white man got here and killed all of them. Well, most all of them, Mason. The stories that you hear from some people when they came over, like the estimate was like 30 or 60 million buffalo. I mean, I just can't imagine how many. That's like mind-boggling. And I don't know how you kill that many. I do know how you kill that many. You ride on a train next to the buffalo and you just shoot them all and let them lay there and die. Which is really what happened. But anyway, like I'm sure they did migrate from different areas on the plains. You're probably right about that. But now, which ones are probably the biggest migration of large animals? Caribou, yeah. So if you go up in Alaska and Canada, you have large, in the hundreds of thousands of caribou that are migrating around, primarily looking for food. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen these pictures of what?
Do you know how many buffalo are left like now?
That's a good question. I don't know. Like, there's not many wild populations. There's probably a few like designated prairie areas, and I've seen some in Yellowstone and like a couple of parks in South Dakota. Now, there's some woodland buffalo up in Canada. We had buffalo in Alabama, like south of here. What we would call the Black Belt Prairie, like that was actually like a prairie because of fires burning it off pretty regularly. That was mostly a prairie, and you had bigger animals like buffalo that were like eating the grass down. And so they were found in this region before the settlers came over and killed them all. We also had elk, lots of black bears, mountain lions, ivory-billed woodpeckers. I'm sure some other stuff they killed out. Yeah.
Like I've always wondered this, like how do they know something's extinct? Like how have they looked everywhere? Like,
Oh, well, I mean, like when you're talking about extinction, you could say it's extinct in Alabama. You could say it's extinct totally. So you have to kind of define your extinction level. Depends on location.
But like they're never, like how do they know? Like do they look?
Well, I mean, nobody
everywhere?
sees one for a certain length of time. I don't know what the length of time has to be before you say it's extinct, but I imagine it's probably 10 or 15 years or something like that without finding any evidence. Now, sometimes they've said something's extinct and then found them on like a game camera when they were searching for something else. I have heard a couple cases of that, but I think it's pretty rare.
I've
So
heard the case of, I forgot what animal it was, but like they hadn't seen one in like 40 or 50 years, and then someone like shot one because it was eating its animals, and they like figured out like, oh, this was something we thought was extinct.
there was a monkey in somewhere in like Indonesia or Malaysia that they found on the game camera that they thought was extinct.
It might have been like a California black bear or something like that, or California something bear. I don't know.
I don't know about that one. Yeah, Miranda.
There's an ivory-billed woodpecker at my dad's house, and that thing has built a nest.
How do you know it's an ivory-billed woodpecker?
We've seen it.
They're extinct.
No, they're not.
I'm gonna need you to take a picture of that.
Okay.
Guess I didn't look
How
at
big is it?
It's not big.
Ivory-billed woodpeckers are like 1.5 feet or 2 feet tall.
The thing is like that big.
No, but I'm talking about the actual woodpeckers that big. Like they're gigantic. How do you know it's ivory-billed?
Isn't it like red on the top?
I think that's a pileated woodpecker. Well, you need to take a picture, and we will, if you have one there, we need to let somebody know because that's the first one that's been seen since the 1930s or so in the United States. The idea was basically back in the early 1900s that they cut down pretty much all of the forest in southern Louisiana and Florida and Alabama and Mississippi, and their habitat's basically destroyed. There's hardly a tree left in Alabama a forest left in Alabama that hasn't been cut down. There's one big tree up in Bankhead where I usually carry people camping that's estimated to be 400 or 500 years old. And there's a cypress tree down in the Mobile Delta that wasn't cut that's probably 300 plus years old. But there are very few. Most every tree has been cut down since people have been here.
What was that tree that went extinct? They used to be like the dominant tree in like Alabama. You told us about last year, Nate.
That went extinct? Well, like a third of the state used to be longleaf pine.
Oh, that's what it was.
Yeah, they're actually, that's not, there's still some longleaf pine, not as many. They're actually lots of efforts to reestablish longleaf pines in the state. So I think those will probably recover. They're trying to recreate some of the natural habitats that were here before people colonized this area and destroyed it and changed it. So we'll see what happens. You know, they've brought back elk in a lot of parts of like around the Smokies. And there's also some elk, I think, up through Virginia, West Virginia area. They brought some back in. So they're trying to reestablish some of these animals that were previously basically wiped out in those areas.
You know what the prairies that's a straight black belt now? Like
Yeah, the black belt's pretty much all grown up in pine, people's planting on pines and stuff. So and there's not much of it that's publicly owned. So it wouldn't be, I mean, you have to have like a wide open spaces to reestablish buffalo. And you'd have to have like a lot of land bought up. And I just think that'll never happen. Which is a shame. I mean, it'd be cool to be able to go south of here and see a bunch of buffalo. Right now, you can actually go up to, there's a place called Land Between the Lakes in Kentucky. It's kind of in, what is that, western Kentucky. And they have some native buffalo populations that have reestablished there. So it's probably the closest you can go to see like native buffalo. And you can go up the Smokies and see elk. So there were also wolves in Alabama, but kind of coyotes have taken over the wolves' habitat, so it's really not that different. Anyway, all right, navigation. How are these things getting where they're going? Well, like I said, we'll have to figure that out. So I have some really cool videos that I've shown in the past, like with animals crossing these rivers in Africa. I had this one with some gazelles, and y'all probably seen stuff like this. And there were a bunch of crocodiles in the water, like 20 footers. I mean, these things were huge. Probably 20, 25 gazelles trying to cross the river. This family's trying to get to the other side for grazing. And I mean, like, it just wiped out almost every one of them. I think maybe one or two made it across. It was just like a mass murder. It's crazy. But that's one of those things. It's like this trade-off. Are you willing to cross the river? Are you, is it worth it for the food on the other side? I think I remember, like, once one of them jumped in, they all jumped in, and they were just all, it was a mistake. Wildebeest probably a little bit more likely to survive just because they're so big and they can kind of fight and kick. But smaller animals like that, I mean, it's like taking candy from a baby walker. All right, consciousness. Now, speaking of, are these animals conscious? Do they know what's going on? Interpretation of many stimuli and integration with past experiences and outcomes. Being awake, being conscious, thinking about what's going on. He really goes into some different stuff here, the note writer, and I'm not going to get into too much, but he's talking about, some of our higher level brain function is like how we think about right and wrong. Because I don't think most animals do that. Do y'all think? They're operating just on, let's eat, let's reproduce, let's get some sleep, let's eat, let's reproduce, get some sleep. And so in terms of just morality, ethics, things of that nature, I don't know that there's many other animals that ponder on that. Now, that doesn't mean that, if you have a dog, you ever have them seeing them, be compassionate and a lot of characteristics that we would associate with humans. So maybe one day we'll be able to communicate with AI. Yeah.
What's the difference between orientation and navigation? Is it pretty much the same thing, using points of reference to go on long trips?
I think the navigation, both those sound about the same, is just referring to using landmarks and where things are located And I think orientation, you're using something to guide you, like the magnetic field or stars. Maybe just not as much of a physical structure on Earth.
Okay.
But that sounds about the same. I don't know that you're going to see a lot of detailed questions on that. Now, let's look at part 3. Some other behaviors. Let's look at our kangaroo friends that Katie was talking about here. Actually, turn to 1142 real quick. Okay, on 1142, we have some learning behaviors take place. Y'all may have seen this with like chimpanzees, or there's a monkey in South America that teaches like its offspring to use tools to break open nuts and shells and stuff. There's actually some birds that have learned to do this where they've figured out how to pick up rocks and drop them on stuff to break things. So that's kind of like primitive tool use. Anyway, and on the bottom here, we have another learning activity where use of learning calls. So you're using certain sounds to signal to other individuals within your group. So those are a couple of helpful learning behaviors that we have among individuals. Social behaviors include aggression, competition, courtship, cooperation. Those are all examples of social behaviors that you see. Some of those to gain dominance, some of those to help usually propel you to the top, some for mating, and some just working together to get some type of benefit. So like I said, one of the things you need to focus on for this unit is, what are those relationships? Why are those relationships in play? All right, study of social behavior as it relates to evolution. Turn to 1151. Skip around here quite a bit. Now, if that's not the ugliest looking thing you've ever seen in your life, have you ever found any like rat babies before? Look at that joker. That's an interesting looking animal. One time when I was little, I uncovered, like we used to have hogs and stuff, so we had a lot of feed and grain bins, and I was moving a grain bin, and there was a rat nest under there, and it had a bunch of babies, and I mean, I was probably like 10. All those little rat babies, you know, when they're born, they don't have any hair. They look like little red gummy bears. I swear, it's the same size. They look just like them. Didn't taste like them. I'm just kidding. I tried to cover it back up. I think my dad would have preferred I dispatch them, but I didn't want to mess with those babies. I don't know if she ever came back or not. But anyway, it's so funny like watching things that are little like that look different than you expect them to. Now, cooperative behavior. Why do we have cooperative behaviors? What are some examples?
I mean, we have them so that increase your chances of survival.
Okay, when you work together, like in towns and villages and groups, you are more likely to survive than if you're on your own a lot of times. What are some animals that work together?
Lions.
Lions have a pride. What?
Ants.
Ants, colonies of ants. What else?
What are the primate groups? Like the monkeys, all of them.
Primates. A lot of times they live in groups. Some of those are more isolated though.
Schools of fish.
Fish work in groups together. What about just thinking about like they're coordinating things together, not just like living together in a group? I always think of like wolves or coyotes, how they hunt together, hunt in packs. I think probably a better example, probably more efficient, is our friends the orcas. Have y'all ever seen any like hunting stuff they do? Like killer whales? Killer whales are like, I'm pretty sure I'd put them at the top of the list under humans and probably above about half the people I've seen in the lunchroom goofing off in terms of just pure intelligence and ability to figure stuff out. Like some of their hunting strategies, it's crazy good. And like their ability to figure out animals, like they know how to flip sharks over and stingrays over so that they like paralyze them. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And I saw one video the other day where they flipped this great white shark over and paralyzed it, and then they tore into it, and the only thing they ate was its liver, and then they just left it. And so there was something in that liver, that the minerals and nutrients in there that they were looking for.
Wasn't that the only thing people can eat from a shark?
What about the fins?
I don't think you actually eat the fins, do you?
They just make a soup out of it?
Yeah, they make a soup out of it. I don't know if it's like...
You can only eat the liver? I've never heard that. I'm going to need you to do some research.
I read, like, the book Unbroken. I read that, and, like, it mentioned, like, that you're only supposed to eat the liver of the shark, I think. And then they try to eat starving to death out in the ocean, and then they're like throwing it all up or something. It was toxic.
I've never heard that. I'm gonna need you to look that, research that for me.
I'll do that.
What can you eat off of shark? Don't eat sharks. I wouldn't recommend it.
Don't like orcas like torment their like prey whenever they.
Sometimes they play with it. I think of it like a cat that catches a chipmunk and maims it, and then it's playing with it for like 4 hours and then won't dispatch it. And your dog gets out there and it does the same thing. And I'm like, can't one of y'all kill this poor innocent animal? Anyway, so agonistic behaviors. Fighting. Dun-dun-dun. Where's that kangaroo, Katie? Oh, there they are. 11:48. So we went to Australia a few years ago, my wife and I, and we'd been there for 4 or 5 days. Hadn't seen a kangaroo. So keep in mind, we're the coast, you got the Great Barrier Reef, and then just inland, you've got this rainforest, this very beautiful rainforest. And then you go over some mountains, and it gets very, very dry. It's like dry forest, very, very dry forest. You're getting close to the outback. And so we'd been close to the coast, hadn't seen any kangaroos, and we go over the mountains. We go into this town. On the way there, we saw a kangaroo was dead on the side of the road. So what do? We get out and take pictures because I was like, this may be the only kangaroo we see in Australia. And I was thinking we're going to see millions of them, right? And so anyway, we go into town and we're talking with people there. And we're in this like redneck one-horse town. We had to stay at a hotel. I mean, it looked like a murder scene had happened in the bathroom. It was like they rent out rooms, but the bathrooms were separate, and they had separate like girl and boy bathrooms. And in one of the bathrooms, something had happened. I don't know what it was. And it was like a rodeo. It was like a rodeo town. And so we got up. We were asking them we haven't seen any kangaroos. And they're like, did you go to the golf course? And we're like, the golf course? And they're like, yeah, go to the golf course in the morning. So we got up the next morning, go to the golf course. And guess what? There's like 1 million kangaroos out there. There were hundreds of kangaroos. They were out there, I guess, because they irrigate the grass or whatever. They're out there eating the grass off the golf course in the morning before people get out there. I mean, there were kangaroos everywhere. You've never seen so many. Some of them were fighting. You had a ton of little babies that were jumping in and out of pouches. It was really cool to watch them. And you could tell they weren't really scared of people. I mean, they weren't aggressive, but they weren't really scared. Some lady came out there and tried to run us off because we hadn't paid to be on the golf course. We were just out walking around on the golf course at like 7 in the morning. And nobody was there. So I think we gave her like $5. And then speaking of behaviors, she told us about, they had a, what's it called? Oh gosh, I forgot it. It's the bird. It builds a nest and it's round, like a brower bird, I think is the name of it. It builds a nest and it's round, and it brings all this like trash around it to try to entice the female to come in. I think it's a brower bird, something like that. And she's like, yeah, they filmed it for National Geographic.
We watched it here, didn't we?
Did we watch one of
I
those?
think we did.
Yeah. And so they had one of those nests at that golf course. And so we went and looked at the nest, and you could see the bird kind of from a distance, but we went and got close. You could see all the little trinkets and like bottle caps and stuff that it had put around the nest to attract the female. It's pretty cool. But anyway, where was I going with that? Behaviors. Oh, and I filmed some kangaroos fighting. So I've got that somewhere on video on the Facebook probably of kangaroos fighting like this. I didn't want to get into it with them though. They were super cute, some of the little ones though. Anyway, agonistic behaviors. Strength, test of strength and aggression. And you see this usually in terms of trying to be like, we think of it in mating, like who's going to be the strongest male that's going to get to mate with all the females. Or a test of who's going to be the alpha on like wolves. So anyway, and that goes into the next thing, dominance or hierarchy, where you have these pecking orders, and we see that in chickens. Good. So that term pecking order comes from chickens. If you've never been around chickens like the ones in the courtyard, if you look, they have a pecking order, like who's in charge. Especially the more of them you get, the more that you see where they get after one another. They're not as nice as you think they are. They'll peck at one another and just make sure, so-and-so knows I'm boss. Anyway, what'd you say?
I said native tribes because it's right.
Pecking order in native tribes?
You said that we're talking about agonistic behaviors. And,
Now skip down to dominance or hierarchy.
I was looking at the wrong thing.
I'm sure we have dominance or hierarchy, right? We have people who are in charge. I mean, if you look at the school, we have a dominance or hierarchy where people, are established. So And I'm sure you see this though when you play on like sports teams and stuff. You have the dominant individuals and you have people who are not so dominant. Anyway. All right, territoriality. So this is defending an area. Why do organisms defend a territory?
Because that's where they eat.
Yeah, it provides the resources they need. So they want to say, hey, this is my territory. And we do, almost every one of you has a territory marked off at home by what? Doors, walls. I was going for fence, but around your yard, right? I mean, so you have your territory marked off outside. So, and as they say, good fences make good neighbors. And so good territory markers make good prevention for other individuals getting in there and messing with you. All right, let's talk about mating. Now, in 1149, somebody didn't think these animals were mating, but I don't know that they're wrestling here, to be honest with you. So we've got some, are those shrews or voles? I can't remember. Voles. Closely with their mates, as shown here, contribute essentially. I don't know what they were thinking. Somebody told me that this morning. Yeah, they're in the act of love, I think. So we see this with our rooster out back, where they have these rituals for mating. Why do animals have mating rituals? Mason, Mr. Gigglesworth. Do humans have mating rituals? Yeah, courtship, asking, promposing, all kind of crap like that. Animals in the wild. I like birds because birds do all those like funny dances to try to talk the female bird into mating with them. Have y'all seen that? Like the birds of paradise? Those are the best ones where they're like dancing around, they're squawking, they're showing all their funny feathers. Anyway, if you don't, yeah, look it up, birds of paradise. Crazy. Anyway, so courtship rituals. So these are rituals that are used to find mates. Now, what's funny is you can have some species of organisms, we'll look at this in evolution unit, that they're basically genetically the same, like this is with birds, but because they have a different mating ritual, they will never interbreed with one another. And so that really can be a defining characteristic of, a separation between species, even if they're very similar genetically. All right, organisms mating, what was this? Oh yeah, turn to 1145. How do organisms pick a mate? Good questions. All right, we have 3 different choices here, and I'm going to skip to the monogamy one first. What is monogamy?
A male-female relationship.
All right, where you just pair up, right?
Yeah.
1 and 1. Now, what's the benefit of monogamy?
Like, it's easier to take care of, like, the offspring.
Okay, so you got 2 individuals, and it's easier to take care of offspring. What else? When you have a partner, you've always got someone there that can help you out if you need things like taking care of offspring or getting food or whatever, setting up a nest, that kind of thing. Now, what is the evolutionary drawback of monogamy?
Less genetic diversity.
I don't know if I wouldn't say there's less genetic diversity. There's less something though.
With other like animals that like fight for control, you have like the best genes being passed on.
Well, you're not really passing on the best genes, right?
Yeah.
So if you have 100 individuals, well, let's say we have 100 birds, and you all pair up and go monogamy, well then there's 50 pairs. Everybody gets to mate and pass on their genes, right? Now, some individuals may have some bad genes and the animals may just not survive, but for the most part, most genes are going to get passed on. Whereas if you contrasted that to polygyny, which is what we see here with the elk in the herd, or you see this with like hippos, even our chickens outside, we've got 1 rooster and 4 hens. Let's say we have 50 individual birds and we say, well, we're going to go the polygyny route. Then instead of having 50 males and 50 females, you would have like 1 male and 50 females. So you're going to limit your diversity. It may be the best, most fit male, but definitely not as much genetic diversity, even though it may be the most fit diversity. You're also going to have females that don't have what? They're not going to have someone to help them take care of the baby. Yeah. You ever seen March of the Penguins or any of those where like the male and females, take turns going out? I mean, you couldn't live like that. So now there are some cases where you have a bunch of males and 1 female, like with
The
Yeah, I said that about ants this morning, and somebody said to me that they think there's just a few male ants, and most of the worker ants are actually female. And then you have the main queen that's laying the eggs. So I don't know how many males. I gotta look that up.
How does it become like the queen? Like, is it just?
How does the one become the queen? That's a good question. You should look that up for extra credit. I mean, think about it like with the same. I was thinking a better example was with bees. I mean, right? You have one queen, you have a bunch of worker bees. Somebody's got to mate with her, but I mean, most of the you have a bunch of drones. So, how does one become the queen? How do you get more queens? These are things. These are important questions, Walker.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If I just came here like the end of the year, like 400 questions, you said like looked up for extra credit, what would happen?
I mean, you need to do it within like a decent time frame of when we discuss it.
So we actually can get extra credit.
Yeah, like tomorrow, or Monday, if you came in and said like, "Hey, I looked that up. Here's what I found out," then I'd give you like 5 points extra credit. Yes. Why do you think I say look that up for extra credit? It's because I don't know the answer, and if you want to look it up, I'll give you a few points. Yeah, sometimes people do. Y'all just too lazy to. All right, promiscuous. Let's talk about being promiscuous. When does that benefit you?
What's what benefit you?
Being promiscuous.
Passing on more genes.
Just because you have sex with a bunch of people doesn't mean you're passing on a bunch of genes. Only one of them's going to mate, right? The note says mating with many. I don't know. I'm going to give you an example of this. The one I know. Dolphins. A lot of times, female dolphins like to mate with a lot of different males. A lot. And it's not because they're doing it for the fun of it. They're doing it so that the males don't kill their baby calf. Why would a male kill their baby calf? Is it calf? Dolphin? Maybe. Why would they kill their baby? Dolphin males, if they don't think they've mated with that female, they will kill the baby. They will like hold it underwater, keep it underwater so it can't come to the top, and basically it'll drown if it can't come to the top. And so they're doing that for what reason?
Well, if they're all going in like a pack and they're all like swimming together, more food is gonna have to be.
No, that's not it. It's not a food thing. Sometimes you see this with lions, you see it with bears, where the males will kill the babies. Okay. Why would it kill the babies?
They want to they want to pass on their genes instead.
Yeah, so they're killing the baby, so the female will come back into heat, and then they can mate with her. If you're a female dolphin, and it takes you 3 to 6 years to raise a baby dolphin, you don't want to be a year or two into that and then have some males come along and kill your baby. So what do you do to fight that?
You have sex with them.
You just mate with all of them.
Yeah.
And then what do they not know?
That's not their baby.
They don't know whose baby that is. They just know that it might be theirs. So, it might be ours. I'm not going to kill it. Literally what happens. So, you know, sometimes you got to do what you got to do. Let's see here. Signals. We've already talked about the round and the waggle dance. Let's talk about altruism on 1151. Altruistic behavior. Y'all should know this term. It means to what?
Like live on their own. No,
Be
like
selfless.
die if like a whole population that gets sick because of you.
Yeah, it's kind of take one for the team. You're doing what's best for the group, not what's best for yourself. Okay? So a good example of this is bees, where you have worker bees that go out. I don't know if you've ever seen the stinger on a bee, how it's attached. Think of your tailbone as having a stinger on the end of it. And when you went to sting something, it ripped out half your spine. That's kind of like it is for when a honeybee stings something. It rips out basically half of its back end and it winds up dying. Now, wasp and other stuff, a lot of times they just lose their stinger. But bees, it's a different story. I don't know how that evolved, but they probably wishing somebody rethink that. But anyway, it's the way it goes sometimes. But they're doing that for the good of the group. Now, you know, Mason, you might think of altruistic behavior on the basketball team like passing the ball, even though you want to take the shot, just because that's what's best for the team. So working together. Yeah. Anybody got any other examples in nature where animals are selfless in their behavior?
Like
For the-
viruses in our immune system. They're like, hey, I'm dying. Watch out.
You're talking about the cells.
Cells in our immune system, yeah, that are willing to sacrifice themselves, okay? What about, I guess like ants going out and biting stuff, even though they're knowing probably they're gonna get killed, like the worker ants and stuff. Like when you step on a hill, they all go out and you're like squishing them. Not that I ever do that. Anyway, so that's doing what's best for the good of the group. All right, y'all have a good day.